So we're going to start in verse 12. I just want to read the text this morning, and then we'll go ahead and discuss what's going on. It says this. Solomon says, "So I turn to consider wisdom, madness, and folly. For what can the man do who comes after the king? Only what has been done. Then I saw that there is more gain in wisdom than in folly, as there is more gain in light than in darkness. The wise person had his eyes in his head, but the fool walks in darkness. And yet I perceive that the same event happens to all of them. Then I said in my heart, what happens to the fool will happen to me also. Why then have I been so very wise? And I said in my heart, this also is vanity. For of the wise as of the fool there is no enduring remembrance, seeing that in the days to come all will have been long forgotten. How the wise dies just like the fool. So I hated life, because what was done under the sun was grievous to me, for all is vanity and striving after wind. I hated all my toil, which toils under the sun, seeing that I must leave it to the man who come after me. And who knows whether he will be wise or a fool, yet he will be master of all for which I toiled and used my wisdom under the sun. This is also vanity. I have turned about and gave up my heart to despair over all the toil of my labors under the sun. Because sometimes a person who has toiled with wisdom and knowledge and skill must leave everything to be enjoyed by someone who did not toil for it. This is also vanity, a great evil. For what has a man from all the toil and striving of the heart with which he toils under the sun? For all the days are full of sorrow, and his work is vexation. Even in the night his heart does not rest. This also is vanity. There is nothing better for a person that he should eat and drink and find enjoyment in his toil. This also I saw is from the hand of God. From apart from him, who could eat or who could have enjoyment? For the one who pleases God has given wisdom and knowledge and joy, but the sinner he has given the business of gathering and collecting only to give the one who pleases God. This is also vanity and striving after wind." Interesting section. Kind of wrapping up this whole experiment thing. Now it's interesting that he's talking about wisdom in such a negative light. This is the same person who wrote the book of Proverbs, Solomon did. So when you look at Proverbs chapter 2, verse 1, he says this, "My son, if you receive my words and treasure up my commandments within you, making your ear attentive to wisdom and incline your heart to understanding. Yes, if you call out for insight and raise your voice for understanding, if you seek it like silver and search for it as for hidden treasures, then you will understand the fear of the Lord and find the knowledge of God." And then later on, Proverbs 4, 5 through 9 says, "Get wisdom, get insight. Do not forget and do not turn away from the words of my mouth. Do not forsake her, and she will keep you. Love her, and she will guard you. The beginning of wisdom is this, get wisdom, and whatever you get insight. Prize her highly, and she will exalt you. She will honor you if you embrace her. She will place on your head a graceful garland, and she'll bestow on you a beautiful crown." Now Solomon wrote both of these texts here, and they're not in contradiction of one another. Remember, chapter 2 is primarily a world without God. Solomon's doing this little experiment here, saying this, I'm going to have this experiment. I'm going to see if I can find joy and satisfaction outside of God and in this world. So he's kind of turning to different things. We looked at last week, he looked at entertainment and wine and projects and money and women. And he tried to find joy in stuff. And he found that it was vanity. He kept on saying that it was vanity, strive for wind. He never found joy and satisfaction in those things. And we looked at the beginning, at the end of chapter 1, he really talked a lot more about wisdom, and he kind of circling back to it. Chapter 1, he talked about wisdom and the vanity that it gave him because he tried to find life in wisdom. But now he's circling back and kind of going a little bit deeper into this experiment of what will satisfy him and what will give him hope. If you notice that he focuses a lot on himself in this, though, and you don't see it in the English, but you'll see it in the Hebrew. What he's really saying is this: verses 12 through 18, he's really saying, I myself, I myself. So in Hebrew writing with a verb, when you write a verb out, the pronoun is already inside of it. So you kind of know who's talking. They don't have two separate words. They just kind of build it all together, and the word just kind of modifies and changes as it reflects if it's talking about he, or it's first person, second person, or third person. But what Solomon's doing is very emphatic. This is what he's saying, and he's literally saying, I myself. Listen, verse 12, he says, so then I myself turned to wisdom. Verse 13, then I myself saw that there was nothing to gain. Verse 14, then I myself perceived. Verse 15, then I myself said in my heart, to the fool will happen to me myself also, and I myself in my heart. In verse 18, twice again, he says, I myself hated all the toil. I myself toiled under the sun. He's just being really emphatic about this. He's really being really emphatic, saying, listen, I'm going to turn to folly and wisdom. I'm going to look at this by myself. The emphasis is not me looking towards God, but me looking introspectively inside my own life, reasoning myself. So he's emphasizing this a lot. This is me doing it autonomously. And he's giving more emphasis. And again, we're revisiting wisdom again. Why? Because this is his crown jewel. He's the wisest who's ever lived. And again, the book of Ecclesiastes is a sermon. And this sermon, with most sermons, you get a lot of repetition, a lot of things said over and over and over again. So he's circling back to this. And he's revisiting folly and wisdom. He kind of puts it a little bit more under a microscope, and he's trying to find meaning in life. But he kind of gives you a little proclamation at the end of verse 12. Look at end of verse 12. He kind of talks about this, the results. He says, for what can the man do who comes after the king? Only what has already been done. Literally saying, for what kind of person is it who will come after the king in the matter of what has already been done? Literally saying, I'm going to analyze this and no one can do it better than me. That's kind of his whole point. He's saying, I'm going to do this, I'm going to analyze this further, and then he's going to say, this is the ultimate conclusion of my experiment. So last week we looked at him trying to find joy and satisfaction in things. Now he's going back to wisdom, and he has some conclusions about wisdom in this little experiment. He's going to really take it to the nth degree and figure out what wisdom actually yields in the end. These are all his conclusions of this experiment. So we'll see in verses 13 and 14, he talks about that wisdom yields a direction that in life that folly does not. He gives us kind of a direction. Look at verse 13. Then I saw that there is nothing more to gain in wisdom than is folly, as there's more gain in the light than there's darkness. The wise person has eyes in his head, but the fool walks in darkness. Literally what Solomon is saying is this. I saw that there is more profit of wisdom than folly, and this is his conclusion of these experiments. There is profitability in wisdom. This is what he's saying here. Wisdom's like light. It shines forth. That's what he's using in the illustration here. Gives you insight to living and what's going on. And again, we have to remember, when he talks about wisdom, you're not talking about a body or information. Today, people think people are wise if they are knowledgeable. They understand facts. They can retain a lot of information. That's not wisdom from the Jewish mindset. The Jewish mindset is really skilled at living. That's what wisdom is. They're able to look at the situation and not just understand what's going on, but apply wisdom so that they can make decisions that make sense. To apply wisdom is to basically know what to do. So you'll see a lot of people that say, oh, that person is wise or that person's smart, but what we really mean in Western societies, they just know a lot of stuff. They'll be really good at Jeopardy. My daughter saw that for the first time last night, and she was like, what is this? Well, these are people that have learned a lot of stuff, and they could actually, turn around and put it in form of a question and be very quick on their feet. But are those people really wise? Well, not necessarily. They're not wise because they might not be skilled at living. How many of you heard the phrase, that they're book smart but not street smart? Yeah, there's a lot of people like that. They're really good at memorizing things, but common sense escapes them. They don't understand how to do simple things in life because they're really good at memorizing. Well, that's what Solomon's talking about here. Wisdom is basically not a body of knowledge. Wisdom is skilled at living, making good decisions, looking at the situation around you and be able to analyze the situation and go, this is the right course to take. This is the great thing to do. Well, not so much for the fool. The fool is blind. The fool does not know what to do. They make bad decisions. They make decisions that are not good for everyone or themselves. They just keep on falling in their folly. I like what Bartholomew said in his commentary. He says, fools, by contrast, are like the blind. They have no idea how to live, and hence they make a mess of their lives. That's what these people are doing. Foolish people continue to make the same mistakes over and over and over again. Whereas a wise person doesn't make the same mistakes over and over again. I remember someone when I was in training a lot, he made this comment about leadership. Leadership's not always making the best decision the first time. It's learning from your bad decisions and making better decisions again. That's a mark of good leadership, because not every leader is always going to make the best decision the first time. They do a lot of times, but if they don't learn from their mistakes, they're not a good leader. That's what Solomon's talking about here. The blind are leaderless in their own minds. They don't know what to do. They keep on doing the same thing over and over, and you go, what's the mark of insanity? Doing the same thing over and over again, thinking you might get a different outcome? Yeah, that's what the fool does, whereas the wise person does not. So that's the first conclusion that Solomon has. There is a profitability towards wisdom. But secondly, in verses 14 at the end, verses 16, he talks about wisdom results the same ending in life. So this is what he says. And yet I perceive that the same event happens to them all. Then I said in my heart, what happens to the fool will happen to me also. And why then I have been so very wise? And I said in my heart that this also is vanity. For of the wise, as of the fool, there is no enduring remembrance, seeing that in the days to come all have been long forgotten, how the wise dies just like the fool. This second observation is, okay, there is a profitability to wisdom, but wait a second, we all die. I have the same fate as the fool, so why should I even bother? That's what he's kind of saying here. Pursuing wisdom in education is limited to only this lifetime, but the fool dies just the same as the wise. And in verse 14, he finds out that wisdom really doesn't prevent death, doesn't avoid it. Last time I looked, the mortality rate was the same as it was from creation. Everyone has died, except for one, Christ. He's the only person that's raised. So we see this, that everyone eventually dies, and we see that these people are trying to prolong life and give it longevity, but guess what? The mortality rate's still the same. It's still 100%. Everyone will die. And again, these verses show a perspective where there is no God, there is no afterlife, there's no eternal value. If you notice that he mentions that there's nothing in reference to God here. We don't get that until we get down to verse 24. We're going to change gears in 24 and we'll see this. But for now, God's not in the picture, so he's like, okay, if God's not in the picture and I'm being wise and it doesn't prolong my life, what benefit do I have of being wise? Why should I even bother? In verse 15, he kind of pins this frustration again with the emphasis of himself again. Listen how it's kind of emphatic in the Hebrew, where it's in verse 15, it says, I myself said in my heart, what happens to the fool also happened to me also. Why have I been so very wise? And I said in my heart, this is also vanity. And one of the things you do in Hebrew writing to emphasize not only repetitiveness of these first-person pronouns, but the positioning of them in the sentence structure. We basically, when we write a sentence, we have to have a certain structure by which we have, verbs and subjects and objects and things like that to make sense of things. But in the Hebrew writing, those actually can be changed and flipped around, which doesn't sound good when we would transliterate it perfectly across or translate it in the sequence that it is, but in the Hebrew mind, it makes ultimate sense. So what he's doing here is typically you would give the verb first, but what he's doing is basically putting the subject towards the beginning. He's forcing that subject to the front and emphasizing this emphaticness of me. Again, this is Solomon's very sad predicament. He's very upset and angry at this moment. But again, he's being selfish. Solomon is being very selfish in this endeavor. It's all about him. He's basically saying, why would I even be wise? Why would I have even devoted the rest of my life to this endeavor when the outcome is such that I don't get any benefit thereof? And it's so true. Our society, we think that the more information we have, we get a prolonged life, and there is some truth to that. The mortality rate has been elongated in the sense that people live longer, but he's looking at this like there's no benefit for me at all. There's none there. In verse 16, he says this, "For of the wise as of the fool there is no enduring remembrance, seeing that in the days to come all will be long forgotten. How the wise dies just like the fool." Garrett in his commentary says the intellectual's real hope is that he'll achieve lasting fame and be remembered for his great contributions. But Solomon's saying, think about this. How many wise people never get any recognition? How many wise people never get the longevity of lasting throughout history? Not many. I mean, very few people have actually get that recognition of them being a wise person for a long time in history. And they're remembered the exact same way as the fool. What's that remembrance? Not much, if at all. The fool dies, we don't remember them. The wise person dies, we don't remember them either. Unless they had some lasting contribution. And Solomon's like, this is futile. This is pointless. Why have I devoted myself to this? And it's interesting. In verse 16, he uses a verb tense that's very unique. He uses a future perfect. So what is that? Oh, you guys, what's a future perfect in Hebrew? He says it, something that's going to happen in the future in the past tense, as if it will actually happen. He's not saying this will happen. He speaks as this has happened, but it hasn't happened yet. We all know as a reader, it hasn't been finalized yet, but in the future it will be. There's certainty behind this fact. That's what a future perfect does. There's absolute certainty that something will happen and come to existence. This verb's used a lot of time with what God will do, and his promises and prophecies. They use the writer, the prophets will use a future perfect, indicating even though it hasn't happened yet, it's so sure that it'll be done. And this is what Solomon's doing. He says, I haven't died yet, but I know what's going to happen. I know my fate. I've already been forgotten. What Solomon's saying is it's better for a person to prepare for eternity than immerse himself for this life alone. And he's not looking for eternity. He will later, but that's this point. It's temporal. And then in verse 17, he talks about the benefits that are temporary but do not add to one's happiness. Verse 17 says this, "So I've hated life, because what was done under the sun was grievous to me, for all is vanity and striving after wind." He's bitter. He's upset. He's strived for all these things, but he's very upset with his current situation. And the main reason why is this. Solomon's life, wisdom was kind of the crown jewel. He didn't emphasize his riches like he did his wisdom. That was to him the thing that he idolized, was his wisdom that was given from God, and it did not satisfy him. He uses this word grievous. It's kind of a bait and switch word that tricked him. He thought it would give him something, but it gave him something else. And again, that word vanity is something that's there temporarily, gives some experience that is joyful, but then it's fleeting and it's gone. It doesn't satisfy him. And that's what he's saying. This does not satisfy me at all. I mean, why would I have been wise? I've hated life and all its vanity and striving after wind. It's like grasping after that. So then he stops there, verse 17. He finishes that experiment. Then he goes to the next one, which is work. verses 18 through 23, he starts talking about work. And the reason why he brings up work is this. This is something everyone can do. Everyone has an opportunity to work. The first experiment in the beginning of chapter 2 was riches and wealth. Well, not everyone's going to have that opportunity. Some people are not going to be wise like Solomon, so he says they don't have the opportunity. So he kind of goes down to the least common denominator that all mankind can partake in and possibly find some enjoyment, which is work, or in this case, he uses the word toil. And again, he's looking at work outside of God. So this is not one of those verses that you take out of context and say, man, I hated all my toil. Look, Solomon's hating his work. I hate work too. It's miserable. I don't want to do it. The Bible says it's hateful. You have to understand what he's talking about. He's talking about a world without God. It's pointless. And the conclusions that he comes with work, and we see this in the workplace, we see this in schools, is what? Work is pointless. No one likes it. But with God, there is a point to it. And we're going to see that here in a minute. So verse 18 and 19 talks about the results of your hard work might be mismanaged. It says this, I've hated all my toil, which I toil under the sun, seeing I must leave it to the man who will come after me. And who knows whether he will be wise or a fool. Yet he will be the master of all for which I've toiled and used my wisdom under the sun. This is also vanity. In this section, he uses the word toil or work 8 times, so there's an emphasis on work, labor. And the purpose of life can be found in work, in which he's trying to do that, but he's realizing it's actually a waste of time. The reason being this, he's thinking, I'm going to work, I'm going to build all these things. We looked at this, again, all the things he built back in the beginning of this chapter. Great things. And then he stops and pauses and goes, wait a second, I'm about to die. I'm going to die here soon. What's going to happen to all my stuff? All these things I've collected, all these things I've built, all these things I have. Who is going to enjoy these things more than me? And his conclusion is nobody. Really, no one. He's coming to old age. Will this person be a wise person or a fool? What will be done with my stuff? Will he change what I have done? And he becomes very upset, and there's no guarantee of someone's going to keep what you enjoy or keep up what you've done after you pass away. We see this time and time again where people buy things and collect things or maybe own property that they want to keep, and then they pass away, and then guess what the kids do? Well, they get that stuff is not as precious to them, and then they put it on an estate sale. It's gone. It's sold off. They're like, this is extra stuff. I don't want this. I don't need this. Or they inherit the family business, and what the question is, are they going to be able to keep the family business going? And Solomon's point is, I don't know. He was the master over his kingdom and his stuff, but he now was looking down the lineage and is realizing that the person that might take up the reins for him after he passes away might not be as wise or might not do what he wants to do, which is his son Rehoboam. Now, a little study here. I think we have a little bit of time. We're going to kind of go through Rehoboam's brief intro. But if you turn to 1 Kings chapter 12, we're going to see what Rehoboam does. Solomon, give you a thing, Solomon's passed away, and now Rehoboam has the duty of taking over the kingdom. He's died. In verse 1 says this, so Rehoboam went to Shechem, for all the kings had come to Shechem to make him king. And soon as Jeroboam the son of Nebat heard of it, for he was still in Egypt, for where he had fled from King Solomon, then Jeroboam returned from Egypt. And they sent and called him, and Jeroboam and all the assembly of Israel came and said to Rehoboam, your father made our yoke heavy. Now therefore lighten the hard service of your father, and his heavy yoke was on us, and we will serve you. And he said, go away for 3 days and come again. So the people went away, and then King Rehoboam took counsel with the older men who stood before him, and Solomon his father, while he was yet alive, saying, how do you advise me to answer the people? And this is the old men saying, And they said, if you will be a servant to the people today and serve them and speak good words to them when you answer them, then they will be your servants forever. So we got some good wisdom here, right? Wise old guys come in, tell them this is what you should do. Here's what Rehoboam did. But he abandoned the counsel of the old men and gave him and took counsel with the young men who had grown up with him and stood before him. And they said to him, what do you advise that we answer the people who have said to me, lighten the yoke that your father put on us? And the young men that had grown up with him, kind of an idea that these are his buddies, these are his friends, said this, thus you shall speak to the people who said to you, your father made our yoke heavy, but you lighten it for us. Thus you shall say to them, my little finger is thicker than my father's thigh, and now whereas my father laid on you a heavy yoke, I will add your yoke. My father disciplined you with whips, but I will discipline you with scorpions. Not a wise young lad here. Did a lot of things wrong. First, he did not take wise counsel to the older people around him. He decided to listen to the young people around him, and not only did he say no to the people who said, please lighten the load, but the manner of which he told them was even inflammatory. And what do we find out what happens after that point? Well, we got 10 tribes to the north saying, forget this, we don't want this, we're out of here. Jeroboam, you look like a pretty good guy, we'll make you king of the north, and then basically the kingdom was split in two. I think Solomon had an idea about this when he wrote this. He's getting old, and dads know if sons could take over the family business, or what they'll do. I've heard this many times before where parents don't want to hand over assets to their children or affairs to their children because they're not wise. They're not going to be a wise person and take good care of the means that they've provided. The point that Solomon makes is this, not to put hope in the children who will manage your accomplishment. And that's what he's realizing. I don't know. He's like, I don't know whether or not they're going to be wise. So why put your hope in them? Why put your hope in these children? There's no guarantee that they would be wise. In the case of Solomon's son, Rehoboam, he was not wise. He split the kingdom in two very shortly after his father's death. Whereas if you listen to the wise men around him, he would have basically saved the kingdom. But the point of being is your joy and satisfaction in your hard work should not be what it provides you or what it'll provide your children. There's nothing wrong with working hard and having the children reap the benefits of those rewards. There's nothing wrong with that. The problem that Solomon's having is putting his hope and joy in those things. When he tries to have joy and satisfaction in his projects and his wealth, and having someone take that over and hoping that they would continue his legacy and having joy in that was vanity. That's what it was. We read elsewhere that he never ever dismissed hard work. He never said that. In fact, when we look at scripture, he never complains about work. His point is, don't put your hope in this. This is not your joy. This is not your satisfaction. Again, we're going to look at this here later on in a few verses talking about the joy and satisfaction. So let's look at verses 20 through 21. And he kind of talks about the results of hard work will not be appreciated. Verses 20 says, so I turned about and gave my heart up to despair over all the toil of my labors under the sun. Because sometimes a person who has toiled with wisdom and knowledge and skill must leave everything to be enjoyed by someone who did not toil for it. This is also great vanity. Now Solomon's looking at this and going, I have to give my kids all the stuff I worked hard for and they did nothing to get it. This is vanity. He realizes he can't take it with him, and like every rich parent that gives their kids whatever they want, they really don't appreciate things. I mean, think about things that you enjoy in life. Is it the things that you just received, or the things that you had to work really hard for and get, and strive and labor? Well, typically the things we appreciate is the ones that have great sacrifice. There's work involved. Yes, we do enjoy those gifts that we are given to us, but not to the degree that we worked really hard for those things. Those things, when you have those, you want to cherish those, and that's what he's saying here. He's saying basically, my kids are, basically I've worked hard, my kids don't have to work hard anymore, and now they're not going to appreciate what I've done the way I have appreciated these things. I didn't have the name of the commentary, but put that in your notes. He said this, he says, we think, we work and plan and use our minds, all to leave what we gain to someone else who, as likely as not, will not deserve it. He certainly will not have worked for it and probably will not value it, but squander it. I mean, think about that. How many people have squandered their parents' inheritance? They've worked hard, the parents that is, and they get this inheritance and they squander it. Think about, just people that come on, get a whole massive amount of money that they never anticipated, and how fast it goes away. You don't believe me? Read articles about people who win the lottery. They get hundreds of millions of dollars, and then they're broke in less than 5 years, and their lives are a total wreck. Well, why? They squandered it. They don't know how to handle it. That's what Solomon's saying here. He's thinking about himself. He's like, I've worked hard. I've done all this. And now someone else is going to get it and not enjoy it the way I would enjoy it. This is vanity. I hate this. This is miserable. I mean, how can the funny thing is how can man work and enjoy the results he gives his offspring? And how can man do that? Guess what? Solomon doesn't give an answer here. He just basically says, I'm doing this, and they're going to squander it. They're not going to appreciate it the way I do. And then he moves on. This is very common in this book. He'll bring up some issues, and we're like, Solomon, what's the answer? What's the answer? He doesn't give us an answer. He just kind of moves on. That's what he's doing here. He basically says, hey, they're going to enjoy it. Not the greatest thing in the world here. They're not going to do what I would have done with it. And he calls this not only a vanity in verse 21, and he usually uses in chasing after the wind as his vanity and chasing after the wind. He says this is vanity and a great evil. This is bad, not good. Something that's not there. That's what he says there at the verse 21. He says this is vanity and a great evil. Why? They are going to partake in things that they didn't have to work for and enjoy. That's it. Then in verse 22 and 23, he talks more about the results of hard work are plagued with a curse. Look at this. For what has a man from all the toils and striving of heart which he has done, with which he toils beneath the sun? For all of his days are full of sorrow, and his work is vexation. Even in the night his heart does not rest. This also is vanity. Verses 22 and 23 are not a proof text by which we get out of work. Go tell someone this is just vanity, it's all full of sorrow, why bother? And that's not what he's talking about here. Again, remember his perspective. This is a world without God. If you think about it, if there was no God, what's the purpose of work? It's vexation, it's painful, it's frustrating. In fact, he even mentions it keeps him up at night fearing about the future. About what future? Maintaining what he has and actually earning so he could provide in the future. He's not resting at night. And the reason why he brings this up, we're plagued by the curse. This world is broken. Again, this is a theme that we're going to hit over and over again throughout this book. This world is outside of the garden. It's not solved. The problems are not solved this side of eternity. We won't have a world by which everything works perfectly until Christ comes back and rules and reigns on this earth. When the millennial kingdom comes back and you read about the millennial kingdom, and then the new heavens and the new earth, they're in a perfect state. They're like going back to the garden. We are affected by the fall, and Solomon sees the effect of this. He sees that we live in a broken world, and that it's basically because of what happened in the garden. I don't have time to read it, but just in Genesis 3:17 through 19, after the after God pronounces the curse on the serpent and the woman, then he goes to Adam and he basically says, curses the ground and you're going to toil. And it's not going to be easy. Before that, it was easy. Work now is hard. It's laborious. If you don't believe me, talk to someone who does any form of gardening or anytime owns a home. You're constantly repairing and maintaining what you've done. Before the fall, God told Adam that in Genesis 2:15 says, then God took the man and put him in the garden to work it and keep it. God has given us dominion over creation. We are image bearers of God. Thus, we are the ones that are to keep and maintain. That's basically what God told Adam to do. In the same way, we're still to do that. The keeping and maintaining is to create new things like God, because we're image bearers like God. God created. Only difference is we create things out of things. God created the world, the universe, out of nothing. And then we maintain. What does God do? He maintains the universe, right? And as image bearers, we need to maintain what we have. The problem is the curse. The making and maintaining is hard. It's difficult. There's actually physical laws that we call the laws of thermodynamics by which govern our universe that basically say order goes to disorder, meaning things break. Things don't work. This is a law of science now because of the curse. That's just the way scientists discover the curse. If things don't work the way they're supposed to, it's hard. By the sweat of our brow, we need to work. It's not easy. Adam was to protect the garden, and now because of that, we struggle in our work. And again, the Bible's clear. Work is not a sin, and it's not bad. In Solomon's case, in this situation, yes, it is, because he's looking at the world without God. God's been removed. So work looks like it's bad and evil. But because of the curse, man struggles to work and he worries about his work, and that's the result of sin. So now we've kind of gone through Solomon's experiments in chapter 2. And then he gets to verse 24, and we're going to see a tone change. This is his conclusion of his experiments. He has all these observations about wisdom and work and entertainment, and then he kind of gets to verse 21 and shifts gears, and he opens up with this phrase, there is nothing for a person that he should eat and drink and find enjoyment in toil. This is that phrase, there is nothing, is referring to his conclusion, a summation of his experiment. And it sounds like Solomon's being contradictory here, but he's not. He really isn't. Because as you notice in verse 24 through 26, guess who's been introduced? God. You notice God has not been mentioned in this book up till this point. If you really look through it, God is not really being mentioned at all until verse 24. It's the first time he's been mentioned. And he's mentioned over and over and over. Now, this is his perspective change. So he's saying, okay, I tried it without God. I tried to be autonomous. I tried to live in a world as a practical atheist. Now I'm bringing God into the picture, and this is what is going on. Look at let's go and read it all together. It says, verse 24 says, for there is nothing better for a person that he should eat and drink and find enjoyment in his toil. This also I saw is from the hand of God. And apart from him, who can eat or who can have enjoyment? For to the one who pleases him, God has given wisdom and knowledge and joy. But to the sinner, he has given the business of gathering and collecting only to give to the one who pleases God. This is also vanity and striving after wind. Solomon is changing his mindset. Now he's looking at the good things that the world provides all mankind and from a different perspective. Theologians refer to this as called common grace. Common grace is not salvific grace, it's grace that every human being partakes in. Things that we can enjoy, things that we all receive. Things that benefit us to give us joy and satisfaction in life. But the problem is that the unbeliever doesn't look at it from the hand of God and call it common grace, but as a believer we do. We look at it from a different perspective, and we should. So we shouldn't be grumbling and questioning. We shouldn't be upset when things come to us that God has given to us. We shouldn't be complaining about work or that things aren't the way it should be. This is part of God's plan. Listen to what the psalmist says about this from a God-centered perspective from Psalm 104 verses 14 and 15. You cause the grass to grow for the livestock and the plants for man to cultivate, that he may bring forth food from the earth and wine to gladden the heart of man, oil to make his face shine and bread to strengthen man's heart. The psalmist is looking at this and going, okay, we have these things from God so that we can enjoy them. We can partake in them. And again, it's not in contradictory what John says in his epistle. He says, don't be the friend of the world, because if you're a friend of the world, you're enemy of God. He's not saying that, or do not enjoy the things of this world. That's what John's saying. It's not in contradiction. John's in harmony with Solomon. John's saying basically, don't find the joy in this world. Don't do that in this world. Solomon's saying the exact same thing, but when you look at it from the point of view from who gave it to you, God, you can enjoy these things. In verse 24, basically work is given to man. He says this also I see is from the hand of God. This word this is referring back to the toil back through 18 through 23, all the work that was involved. This, what are we referring to? Work is given to us from God. Again, Solomon hated labor without God, but when God's in the picture, the world actually makes sense. It does. Work makes sense when God's back in the picture. Proverbs 12:14 says this, from the fruit of his mouth a man is satisfied with good, and the work of a man's hand comes back to him. Saying that, what is Solomon saying here? He's saying, you work hard, guess what? You get something back, and guess what? You're satisfied with a good job. A result of you doing a good job, there is a satisfaction in that. Only when you understand who gives you that. That's God. That's what Solomon's saying here. In order to enjoy life, we must be theocentric in our theology. Everything's from God for his glory and our good. And when we understand and know that, things go well. Don't have time to read this, but in Ephesians 6:5-8 talks about us working as unto the Lord, as servants of Christ. So whether we have a project or a task, we do a job well done, things are good. Later on in this book, Ecclesiastes 5:12 says this, sweet is the sleep of a laborer, whether he eats a little or much, but the full stomach of the rich will not let him sleep. Again, the aspect of hard work has its rewards. Whether you get a little food or a lot, there is a satisfaction of a job well done in God's economy. So he's saying here that God is good in this context. He's saying basically in verse 24, work is from the hand of God, and there's some enjoyment in it. In verses 25, joy is only found in him. He says this very emphatically, for apart from him, who can eat and who can have enjoyment? Well, this is kind of a rhetorical question. No one can have enjoyment outside of God. This is his conclusion. It's a rhetorical question. You cannot live a life with joy without God, and that's the whole point of this chapter. Solomon tried to find it without God, didn't get it. But with God, he found joy. C.S. Lewis, in his book Reflections on the Psalms, talks about there's a connection between praise and enjoyment. He sees this correlation in the Psalms. Let me think about this. Think about our lives. When you praise something, you find enjoyment in that thing. A husband's praising his wife. There's a joy in there. Someone who reads a book. Someone who goes on a hike, or when you go out to eat, you praise the chef or the meal that you have. Why? Because you had enjoyment in that. Or a sport, it goes forward and forward. But C.S. Lewis found this over and over in the Psalms. Listen to Psalm 43, verse 4. It says, I will go to the altar of God, to God my exceeding joy, and I will praise you, the lyre, O God, my God. Psalm 9, verse 2 says, I will be glad and exult in you. I will sing praise to your name, O Most High. And as you read the Psalms over and over and over again, when you praise the person, you find joy in that person. That's God. So we see this over and over again. So what's changing here? These toiling enjoyment things that we get in verse eating and having enjoyment is found in God. So when we get to partake in those things and enjoy things in life, and we get to praise God, guess what? We're not finding joy in the substance that we just partook in or the event that we experience. We are praising God and finding joy and satisfaction in Him. So when we get those things that are nice, when we are able to partake in experiences that provide us satisfaction and joy in the temporal sense, when we praise God, it actually magnifies and glorifies Him. That's what Solomon's saying here. Not in the thing that we do, but partaking in that thing we do, realizing who it came from, and then exalting Him. That's where it is. And the psalmist is saying that we should and praise God continually, and that's what Solomon's saying here. Just praise Him. And then verse 26, it says, blessing comes to those who pleases God. It says, for to the one who pleases God, him, God, has given wisdom and knowledge and joy. But to the sinner, He has given the business of gathering and collecting only to give to the one who pleases God. This is also vanity and striving after wind. Literally, that word pleases Him or pleases God literally means do good to His face. That's what it means in the Hebrew, to do good to His face. When you're doing good towards the Lord, there's an aspect of obeying Him, and there's blessings, and disobeying that there's cursings. There's an aspect of sowing and reaping that we see in Galatians 6, 7 through 9. But what this is not saying is this. This is where the prosperity gospel goes astray. Do X, Y, and Z to please God, and then you get what you want. That's not what Solomon's saying here, and this is not what the Bible says. The Bible says there's a correlation that if you do what pleases me, there is an aspect of blessing upon you, but I only give what's good for you so that you do not do what Solomon did. What? Find joy and satisfaction in those things. God never wants us to do that. He always wants to be exalted. There's one attribute of God that we are never to emulate. That is an attribute that we can do. There's some attributes that we can never emulate because that's only a characteristic of God. What is like His omniscience, omnipower, things like that. Things that set apart God as being a being above us. But there's some things that are called communicable attributes. Love, mercy, things like that we could actually partake in. But there is one that God does that we should never partake in. The word is jealous. If you go through the Old Testament, there's a word called, He says He is a jealous God. In fact, one of His names is jealous in the Old Testament. That's His name. Why? Because God requires all the glory to Himself and to no other. And He can because that's who He is. Whereas if we are jealous, we are in sin. Why? Because we want what we want for ourselves, and we don't deserve that. But God does. And this is what's going on here. God says, listen, if you're going to please me, you're going to give me all the glory. If you please me, I'm going to give these blessings, but don't turn these blessings into little idols that you want to worship. Glorify me in the midst of all these things. That's what Solomon's saying here. Solomon's basically saying that very clearly, that this is what needs to be done. Then at the end of verse 26, he talks about this. He says, but to the sinner He has given the business of gathering and collecting only to give to the one who pleases God. This is vanity and striving after the wind. That word "this" is referring to what the sinner's doing. They don't know what they're doing. Now we do. The sinner in God's economy, the sinner creates things to be given to the believer for our enjoyment, for God's glory. So the next time you're at a restaurant, and I don't know if you don't know if they're a believer or not. But if they're an unbeliever, guess what? They're serving you. Why? To give God the glory. So you get partake and enjoy that. People who build the widgets and the fun things that you get to enjoy in life that do not acknowledge God, God has purposed that they will do those things. Why? So that you can enjoy them, so that you can give God the glory. The unbeliever never sees it this way. But now we kind of peel back the curtain just a little bit. And that's what Solomon's saying here. He's given the business of gathering and collecting only to give to the one who pleases God. Kind of ironic, isn't it? Because the world kind of thinks it's the other way around, right? It goes all the way from the highest, biggest CEO of the biggest corporations in America who do not know God. Their whole purpose in this context is to gather and collect to give to the one who glorifies God. Interesting perspective, isn't it? Everything the sinner does ultimately works out for the benefit of God and his glory. And work without God is futility. And we see this. So this is Solomon's conclusion here at the end. He's shifting gears and he's saying basically this: I've tried it without God. It does not work. Verses 24 through 26 now brings God into the perspective. And now we're going to start looking a little bit more about what does it look like to have a God-centered perspective. That's where chapter 3 kind of goes off. Remember, these chapters are artificial. They're not there. They were created after the fact for our benefit to be a quick reference. This is one flowing sermon because he goes on. The first word of chapter 3 is for everything there is a season. And who's he been talking about? God. Next week, we're going to look at all these seasons and the purposes of all these seasons that glorify God and God himself.